I mean, I've outlined, let's see, 4 ways that I think are good for getting into Nietzsche. I've discussed some invaluable resources for studying Nietzsche here in our orbit. Like I said, Nostromo is amazing up there in the nest. Lycurgus is amazing up there in the nest. And also, I, I would be absolutely remiss if I didn't point out that Theonis is just an amazing, amazing person. But now, unfortunately, he doesn't really talk too much about Nietzsche very often. He used to do spaces on him. He doesn't do that very much anymore. He's been working very hard on a translation of a very important historian of 20th century Germany for a while now. He and Martin have been doing that. So, I mean, certainly follow him and pay attention to his timeline, but I don't know how much he discusses these things anymore. Occasionally, he will do spaces, though. He did one the other day with Upcountry, which was just absolutely invaluable. I could not believe that people didn't choose to go listen to Theonis and Upcountry talk. But in any case, you got to follow these people to see when they're doing these, because unlike our side of things, me, Alejandro, Ancient, if he's still in here, I know Astral does the same thing. We give plenty advance notice. Oh, Theonis is in here. Always good to have him in here. You're always welcome to a mic in my spaces. But that being said, there was, let's see, at least 2 ways I said that I don't like and that I think are very, very detrimental to getting into Nietzsche. The most detrimental, the most dangerous, and unfortunately the most popular is people taking the route of biography, simply reading about Nietzsche's biography, saying that he has, I mean, these are the common tropes that you'll hear. And I can't say this strongly enough. If you hear someone say these, dismiss everything they have to say about Nietzsche ever. You'll hear people say, for instance, that Nietzsche was a misogynist because he was unable to bed or otherwise secure Lou Salome. That's nonsense. Absolutely nonsense. And it has absolutely no bearing whatsoever on understanding Nietzsche's depth of thought regarding Eros. Let's see, I haven't checked my website lately, but I just did sections 3 and 4 of book 1 of Zarathustra, where I outline in great detail with regard to the Overman, the teaching of Eros. Just thinking about it makes me so mad, I sweat. But in any case, the other account would be where you hear people say that Nietzsche went insane because he caught a case of syphilis from some prostitute or something like that. And so he never really completed his life's work, or he's to be discarded because, he was an incel or something and had to sleep with prostitutes. Again, if you hear people say these things, just flatly don't listen to anything they have to say about anything regarding Nietzsche. Those 2 approaches to understanding Nietzsche are by far the worst and most incorrect. Absolutely incorrect. I'm tempted to do a space where all I do is scream, shouting how incorrect and stupid and lazy that is, and unworthy of anybody, really. But I'll hold off on that. I'm trying to be a calmer Athenian stranger. Those 2 approaches, and then also the very common approach of people beginning with Beyond Good and Evil or the genealogy morality. Now, I want to make sure I'm not misunderstood here. It's hard to go wrong beginning anywhere in Nietzsche. Okay, if you simply just want to, if you stumble across a book by Nietzsche and pick it up and read it, I'm happy. I'm just simply responding to the question of how I would suggest that people begin. Now, the reason that I am a little hesitant on people beginning with Beyond Good and Evil is that most people begin with Beyond Good and Evil because it's easier to read. He does, in fact, say in a letter that Beyond Good and Evil says everything that his Zarathustra says, just differently. And what I would suggest is that's true to a certain extent, but he's also being rather ironic to the person he's writing the letter to. What he's saying is that, look, I know Zarathustra is extremely difficult to read, so why don't you just start with Beyond Good and Evil instead, because that might help you out a little bit. And again, he's only saying that to one person, one specific person in a letter. He says in Ecce Homo, for instance, that if you can understand, I forget if he says either 6 or 8 If you can understand 6 or 8 sentences of Zarathustra, that's more than enough work for an entire lifetime, because that's how deep the book is. I'm inclined to agree with him. Every time I go back to read Zarathustra, I learn something new in a shorter amount of time. But that's when you know you're in the rank of a top-rate philosopher, is when you can look at very, very much less than most and understand so much more that comes tumbling out of that. Let's see, I think I might have phrased that wrong. I don't want to sound like I'm saying I'm the philosopher. I'm saying Nietzsche's the philosopher. Let's be perfectly clear here. I would never describe myself as a philosopher. Always a student. But just some key themes to take away from all of this. What's going on with Nietzsche is really everything. You have this quarrel between philosophy and poetry. Even more importantly, I would suggest, is the thinking of Nietzsche's thought in terms of 2 phases. The way he describes his work prior to Beyond Good and Evil is all of his yes saying. And then once he gets to Beyond Good and Evil, it's all of his no saying. And the reason this is so very important is because what Nietzsche defines as the death of a culture is a people who don't understand their principles or don't care enough about their principles to have a firm yes and a firm no. This is something we see in the New Testament, right? Christ says he will spit out the lukewarm. Lukewarm people are worthless. Honest to God, they're worthless. That's what's gone wrong with our political parties, particularly on the right. That's why there's always this continual slip slide over further and further to the left, is because there's no firmness and they're saying no. In fact, we're so unused to saying no that we now have open transsexuals floating around in our orbit, for God's sake. But whatever. In any case, it's the yes saying and the no saying that becomes important. You want to know what Nietzsche says no to, what he says yes to. And then there's also the dichotomy, and this goes hand in hand with the yes and no saying. There's the split in Nietzsche's thought between diagnostics and prognostics. What I mean by diagnostics is, okay, what has gone wrong? And what I mean by prognostics is, okay, what do we do going forward to correct it? Nietzsche's diagnostics are amazing. He diagnoses the West as nihilistic. And on that score, he's absolutely correct. He sees with the clarity of a psychologist that we're not even used to at all, even among the so-called great psychologists. What Nietzsche says is, in various ways, he finds the ways in which the man of the West, who prides himself on his ideals of things like democracy, egalitarianism, women's suffrage, all of these things, he understands all of this as stifling to life. And it's precisely all of those things that man prides himself on the most. And the reason these things become stifling to life is because they're fundamentally not, they're unwittingly, in many cases, culpable of nihilism. And he's going to trace this, especially within Christianity, all the way back to Plato. He's going to say, for instance, that Christianity is Platonism for the people. So there's going to be a lot of that going on. But I should also just add real briefly, I'd be remiss if I didn't include this. A better way to translate Antichrist is anti-Christian, because Nietzsche is such a careful writer. He's a trained philologist, so all the words matter. And he wants to have slow readers, not fast readers. It's not an assembly line. Always be suspicious, by the way, of people who just run down a list of all the books that they've read. Be suspicious of them. Great books take very, very long to read, sometimes a lifetime, sometimes more than a lifetime. But what Nietzsche finds most especially is the ways in which Christianity has allowed for nihilism to slip in. And on the one hand, he sees it as endemic to Christianity itself, with certain virtues that Christianity will uphold. But on the other hand, he has the greatest respect for Christ. One could say that the most powerful and yet still cryptic description of what we might otherwise think of as the overman is what Nietzsche says when he says Caesar with the soul of Christ. So there's something of enormous respect that Nietzsche has for Christ, but it's the tradition of Christianity that Nietzsche will absolutely not abide. And I want to be emphatic about this. Nietzsche and Christianity cannot be reconciled. There are no Nietzscheans who can still claim to be Christians, or there are no Christians who can claim to be Nietzscheans without fundamental dilution or compromise. So that needs to be said. But that's, on the one hand, his diagnostics. And then you have his prognostics. Most people are going to say that the prognostics are the overman, and they're usually quick to jump at this. Most people who even talk about the overman don't know what they're talking about. The overman comes up at the very beginning of Zarathustra. You interpret a text based on where it ends. And so the key is going to be, where does the overman sit in the end of the text? What's going on at the end of the text with the overman? That has to be answered. That's not something I'll get into here. I'll just simply say that it's not as simple as saying that Nietzsche's teaching is the overman. It's not at all clear, even within not even just the first part of Zarathustra, but the opening part of Zarathustra. It's not at all clear that that's what's going to be the final teaching. And it's very, by the way, it's very, very rare that the overman ever gets mentioned outside of Zarathustra. You almost never hear people make a mention of that. That's crucial. If the overman, at least as it's presented in the opening of Zarathustra, is Nietzsche's final teaching, why do we not see it in, for instance, something like Twilight of the Idols or Antichrist? These are questions that absolutely have to be answered. So I'll just sort of leave that there. 4 ways, I suppose, that one could go about entering into Nietzsche. And with last regard on the question of translations, look, it's hit or miss, man. There's none that are very, very good. But like I said, it's not hard to check the original German that Nietzsche uses. Just pull up Nietzsche source or Nietzsche resource. And even if you don't know German, you can at least see if there are words that have been omitted, or if some things could be stated more clearly. Reason. I was talking about reason in Nietzsche because Nietzsche doesn't it's not at all clear to me that Nietzsche dismisses reason. And what they were saying, and very rightly saying, is they were pointing out different passages where Nietzsche does attack reason, because when I went back and I checked the German, the word reason is not even used. That's the word that gets used by the translators. The word that the translators were not using was race. So Nietzsche was in fact talking about race. And of course, the translators left it out because even as long ago as Kaufmann, back in the mid 19th century or so, academics did not want to associate Nietzsche with any discussion of race. So there's very, very, and this is what's been taking me so long in my recordings for Zarathustra, is that I've got to double check all the damn German, because I don't know if Cambridge or Kaufman have flatly, as a universal policy, eliminated the word race that gets used in Nietzsche, because that makes a hell of a difference. So it makes a hell of a difference. And these are things that need to be understood. And I don't know of any English translations that are accepted as very good. They're all usually considered simply good. There's also one last thing I would add. There's a Graham Parks edition of Zarathustra. Anyone who's interested, by the way, in more of this, I do encourage you to take a look at my website, Athens Corner, where I'm doing the Nietzsche series. I mean, right now, as it stands, it's $dollars a month. But at some point, I'm probably going to just start charging I'm going to sell the series individually. Anyone who joins right now, I'll grandfather you in. So you'll only ever have to pay $8 a month just selling these things by the series, because the amount of time I've invested in these is just so enormous that I can't really in good conscience continue it at just something like $8 a month or something. And it's just, I'm offering too much. I'm giving away the farm when people have only asked for a gallon of milk. But I cover all of these things in that series. But I just wanted this to be a kind of extensive and exhaustive intro space on how to even begin studying Nietzsche. He's got this one book, Human All Too Human. He's got this other book, Dawn. These things look intriguing, Athenian. What are they about? Should I read those too? Where do I begin? How do I start? And so, like I said, I just wanted to provide a way in which introductory people could find their way into Nietzsche, along with a number of the things to be on the lookout for that you wouldn't otherwise think are going to be there. And I will end things just on a discussion of why it is the case that Nietzsche is really not taught very well, if at all. And trying to see, I've got it on my shelf somewhere. It's literally called Overcoming Nihilism, Nietzsche's Overcoming Nihilism. And you would think that it's a good book, but when you look, for instance, in the endnotes, the author himself, and this was written, I mean, Christ, it might have been over a decade or two at this point. When you look in the endnotes, the author himself, this reputable scholar from Germany, is arguing on behalf of things like modern liberalism that we're talking about. He makes excuses for Nietzsche about things that have to do with women, things that have to do with race, things that have to do with equality, egalitarianism. So I'll just simply tell you all what the most controversial things about Nietzsche are. Nietzsche does, in fact, advocate for, on the one hand, eugenics, and on the other hand, which really kind of goes together with this, racial superiority. It's that simple. Nietzsche says, now, let me be clear though. It's not that Nietzsche is arguing on behalf of anything in particular. What Nietzsche is saying is he's saying, look, we don't know what the final verdict is on these things. Might very well be the case that there's something to this race card. It might very well be the case that eugenics offers us something that can help us out. It's just that simple. Scholars know this. They don't want to be affiliated with it. That's why in their translations, they avoid the words of race and genetics and things like that. But it honestly, it's just that simple. So there's a lot more to be said about it. I could direct you to, I mean, if you send me a DM, I'll tell you the exact words that you'll want to look up on Nietzsche source that are the German words to look through to find exactly where he uses them, what the context is, and what he has to say about them. It's not that difficult. But that's something you'll never hear. That's also, by the way, why all of the academics and all of the left hate discussions of Nietzsche. I mean, if I was able to show you guys some of the DMs that I've received from academics threatening me and stuff like that because they're saying, Nietzsche is a fascist, blah, blah, blah. I mean, it's just amazing to me. These people are cowards. What it is you have in academia people who simply don't want to be affiliated with thought that is dangerous. Nietzsche absolutely is correct. When Nietzsche says that he is dynamite, that's what he's referring to, is he's going to blow up all of the sacred understandings of the truth, or the sacred truths, I guess we could say, the tradition of the sacred truth. He's going to blow them up. And so, and he does very, very much so. Anytime you're in the realm of talking about particular races and particular forms of eugenics, well, I mean, I could just run down the list, but all of that's there. And the reason they don't want to be affiliated with it is because it's very powerful. It's a very strong theme in much of Nietzsche's writings. Now, what I would simply say is this: if we as thoughtful people are serious about understanding people who were, in many cases, far more intelligent than us and have something to teach us, then we don't close our eyes to their thought just because it becomes dangerous or it upsets our sensibilities. In fact, the whole purpose of philosophy is to do exactly that. Let's never, ever forget Athens, the so-called greatest democracy of the ancient world, put the first philosopher, Socrates, to death. I, I, I don't want to say, I don't want to say first philosopher because the pre-Socratics, of course, are certainly philosophers and what have you. I just want to say what I mean by first philosopher is what you'll usually get in the traditional teaching of philosophy as you begin with Plato. But he was put to death, and he was put to death for a good reason. In fact, Socrates was in fact guilty. He even tells us so. Very subtly, he tells us he's guilty. But he knows just how dangerous the trafficking in philosophy is. We, on the other hand, particularly in the realm of academia today, we want to pretend that it's not dangerous because we want to pretend that we've solved all the problems of mankind with our understanding of democracy, with our understanding of liberalism, with our understanding of plurality. That's how pathetic it is. And so, precisely because we think that we've solved all of these problems, that's why it is that you have these literally morons on the timeline shouting down anyone who's going to talk about, for instance, Martin Heidegger or Carl Schmitt. They're going to say, "Oh, Nazi, racist, fascist." You just have to think to yourself, well, these are fundamentally unserious people. They want to moralize, and that's fine. Morals are very important. It's just going to depend on what your morals are. That's the issue. It's one of those things where it should make you mad that you even have to lower yourself to even have discussions with these people. But unfortunately, they're the ones who hold the positions of authority in the institutions. So unfortunately, we have to lower ourselves every now and then to speak about their stupidity. But that, I suppose, that is what it is. I just have to walk my dog right now. He's my latest rescue dog. And usually when I go for more than 45 minutes, he starts nipping at me. So I got to walk him real quick. I will catch up with you all in your various spaces soon enough.